This is a story about betrayal so deep it still leaves me breathless, about a brother who systematically destroyed my life, only to find himself begging for my help after our parents disowned him. And the twisted irony? They left me a $2 million inheritance, thanks to his own monstrous actions. From the earliest days, my younger brother, David, harbored a resentment towards me that I could never quite understand. And if you think it was jealousy, you'd be dead wrong. He was the golden child, always. Our mother doted on him relentlessly. She cooked his meals, did his laundry, even assigned me to help him with his homework, simply because we were family. I never received that same consideration, that same soft touch. But I was independent, a quiet kid who loved to study, so I just accepted it. Maybe it was my fault for always meeting his needs without expecting anything in return. He never helped me, not once, only ever approaching me when he wanted something. While I was introverted and thoughtful, he was loud and rough, just like our dad. And I've always been brutally honest, never sugarcoating anything, which I think cemented my mother's negative perception of me. David reveled in his status as the family's darling, and honestly, as a kid, I didn't mind. Not until he started weaponizing it. He began bullying me, relentlessly mocking me for being different. He'd tease me about my height, my glasses. The absolute worst was when he'd sneak into my room, read my diary, and then run to Mom, tattling on whatever I'd written. When I finally snapped and yelled at him, or complained to our parents about my shattered privacy, they'd just laugh it off. "It's no big deal," they'd say, as if my personal thoughts were open season. But it went deeper than that. He did truly awful things, like nearly breaking my glasses or putting disgusting things in my food. Once, I found tiny stones in my cereal. Stones. Luckily, before they could shatter my teeth. When I told my mom, her dismissive reply still echoes. This is how brothers bond. Every single fight, David would zero in on my deepest insecurities. We went to the same school, so he knew I was already being bullied. But instead of protecting me, he sided with them, calling me names like ugly loser or hairy monkey, actively encouraging them to physically harm me, telling them I was just a big failure. Another time, during a stupid fight I can't even remember, he looked me dead in the eye and told me to kill myself. Most insults I could brush off, but that one, it shattered me. I was battling my own mental health demons at the time, and hearing my own brother wish me dead was an utter devastation. Dad was often at work, and Mom, well, she just didn't seem to care. She even scolded me once, claiming it was my fault for irritating him. Things spiraled. In high school, there was a shocking incident where David actually tried to set my hair on fire. And unbelievably, my mother still defended him, claiming he was merely playing. Seriously, who plays like that? Thankfully, for once, my dad finally intervened. He saw the gravity of the situation and even threatened to call the police on David. That moment was a profound eye-opener for my brother. He had never faced consequences before, and he was genuinely stunned. Dad made it crystal clear. Enough was enough. David needed to start respecting his older brother. Later, Dad came into my room to talk, something I never expected. He'd always celebrated how similar he and David were. But that day, he admitted he'd hoped for years David would mature. But he was slowly realizing David was becoming a true bully. Hearing that from my dad, that validation, it hit me like a tidal wave. I almost broke down. I confessed everything David had done over the years, even the bullying at school. My dad was utterly shocked by how much I'd endured. The very next day, he spoke to the principal, ensuring those bullies were warned. Then that evening, he enrolled me in MMA classes at our local gym. You need to man up, he told me, and stand up to the bullies in your life. I know, a nerdy kid like me trying to learn to fight might sound laughable, but I was focused. I balanced my studies and daily workouts, and those MMA classes didn't just change my physique, they changed my life. By the way, if you're still with me, soaking in this insane story, make sure to hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss the unbelievable twists and turns coming your way. Asterisk, asterisk. One day, David was up to his old tricks again. He stole my pocket money, the money I'd earned helping with chores, money I'd been saving for ages. I caught him just as he was about to cycle off with his friends. I demanded he return it, but David just sneered, saying all I could do was run to Daddy. I don't know what snapped inside me, but I punched him, right in the face. He stumbled back, stunned, and fell. I retrieved my money from his pocket, then shoved him back down. He started crying loudly, which, I won't lie, was pretty comical. But then Mom rushed out, and when she learned I'd fought him, she was furious. She reprimanded me, saying I should be a better role model for David, who just sat there, enjoying every second of my scolding. Mom even complained to Dad, saying I needed to be controlled. My dad, however, was grim. He asked both of us to explain. I told him how David had stolen my hard-earned savings. David tried to justify it, saying he needed the money for a date and that, as his brother, I should help him. But Dad, firm and unwavering, told David he was lucky I only punched him for stealing. Anyone else would have called the police. He continued, telling David he had no right to take other people's things without their consent. David, enraged, threw a tantrum, probably hoping Mom would side with him. But Dad stayed firm. When David realized he wasn't going to be punished for getting hit, he screamed how much he hated me and ran back to his room, locking himself in. After that incident, David finally began to distance himself. He understood he couldn't bully me anymore. and that even Dad had stopped supporting his antics. For the first time in a long while, I felt like we were equals. Though he could no longer physically harm me, he still resorted to verbal insults when our parents weren't around. His behavior worsened with age, becoming angrier, more short-tempered. If I approached him with a question, he'd ignore me, muttering nerd or loser under his breath. If he needed to communicate something, he'd relay it through Mom. When I questioned her about why he couldn't just talk to me, she'd urge me to be more understanding. I couldn't tell if it was just puberty or genuine, deep-seated hatred. Over time, his comments became unbearable. I desperately longed to move out and get away from him. I repeatedly asked my mother to mediate, to get us to sit down and talk, but she always refused, saying she didn't want to get involved. When I asked her opinion on why David treated me this way, she'd just brush off the question. Eventually, I left for my dream university, a top student with a scholarship. Dad threw a party for me, and even Mom seemed proud. David, however, remained aloof, barely acknowledging my achievements. The day I left was a strange mix of excitement for the future and an overwhelming sense of relief to escape that toxic home. The first few months were pure liberation. I made new friends, thrived in my classes, and started building a life separate from the oppressive atmosphere of my childhood. The constant fear of David's verbal attacks lifted, giving me a newfound sense of peace. During my second year, I met Karen at a frat party. We clicked immediately. Coming from a religious background, having kids outside of marriage was frowned upon, but when we found out she was pregnant in our final year, we decided to marry right after graduation. Our wedding was small but joyful. Our parents were happy for us, and I truly believed Karen was the love of my life. I'd always envisioned a monogamous relationship, one woman to come home to share my life with. Despite other women showing interest, I never pursued anything because I was genuinely content. Karen was my dream girl, and I never wanted to hurt her. But then, I uncovered 2 incidents of infidelity. One was an intermittent affair with her married coworker that spanned several years, and the other, a brief fling with an ex-boyfriend during a family visit. You might think I was naive, and looking back, I can't completely disagree. Each time we separated for a while, and each time I chose to forgive her. I didn't want to raise our child in a broken home, truly believing we could overcome these obstacles. The affair with her coworker happened when we were young, and I rationalized it as youthful mistakes. For a time, things seemed to get better. I couldn't fully trust her again, no, but I did my best to set aside my doubts, knowing that if I chose to forgive, I had to genuinely work towards a fresh start. It had been 4 years since her second betrayal, and I felt confident in my decision. Karen seemed to have changed. We were genuinely happy, planning our future. Then, 3 months ago, my world shattered once more. She revealed she'd been having a long-term affair and, with chilling indifference, suggested our son might not even be mine. Her words struck me like a ton of bricks, a searing mix of shock, betrayal, and disbelief. I struggled to comprehend the enormity of her confession. In a daze, I managed to ask why she kept such a devastating secret. Her reaction was cold, detached, as if she were separate from the pain she caused. Her vague responses left me with more questions than answers. It was a surreal, excruciating moment, confronting shattered trust and uncertainty about my own family. I kept pressing Karen for the truth. I deserved to know the father of the child I had been raising since birth. Finally, she admitted it. It was David. My eyes widened in pure horror. "What do you mean, David?" I choked out. She explained that she and David had become friends when I introduced her to my family. She'd stayed with us from Thanksgiving until New Year's. David, usually cold and dismissive towards me, was warm and polite to her, which at the time had made me glad. Karen, wanting to be accepted, spent significant time with my mom. She noticed the rift between David and me and questioned me about it. I opened up about our strained relationship, explaining it might never heal. Karen understood but started including David in our outings, hoping it would help us bond. Whenever we planned a movie, she invited David, and we'd watch whatever he chose. During this time, David and I actually exchanged a few words, an improvement from his usual silent treatment. I remember Karen and David hanging out, playing video games together, but I never thought anything of it. Karen then told me that one day, David had opened up to her about a recent breakup, feeling vulnerable. He'd struck up a friendship. She mentioned he would harmlessly flirt with her when I wasn't around, and eventually, things escalated beyond her control. The vision of my wife and brother sleeping together made me feel physically ill. Karen confessed she felt guilty afterwards and left him, which matched her abrupt decision to go home instead of spending New Year's with me. Though I tried to convince her to stay, she was adamant. When we met back at college after the holidays, she was her usual cheerful self, so I never questioned anything. 2 weeks later, we found out she was pregnant. Karen admitted she didn't know if the child was mine or David's, and with no way to prove it, she chose to stay with me, knowing I was the more dependable brother. This was why we got married. My world felt like it was crashing down. The son I loved might not even be mine. I asked Karen if she had been sleeping with David recently, and she slowly nodded. She revealed they had always stayed in touch, their chemistry undeniable. They would sneak off to hotels, lying to me about working overtime. Half her business trips were actually romantic getaways with him. I asked why she married me if she wanted my brother. Karen said she didn't want to be the one to break off the marriage. She saw me as a wonderful father to our son and decided to stay. In her words, she made a mistake and didn't know when to stop. I told Karen I was glad she finally told me the truth, but that I was packing up and leaving. She started crying, begging for forgiveness, expecting me to yell at her. Instead, I calmly packed my clothes. Karen insisted that if I loved her, I should fight for her, that mistakes happen in every marriage. When she realized I wasn't going to budge, she changed tactics, saying our son would be affected by a divorce, that children shouldn't be raised in broken homes. I reminded her that I might not even be the father, which made her cry more and accuse me of being cruel. It seemed like she genuinely believed nothing could make me leave. Perhaps it was partly my fault for letting things slide in the past. While I did love her, it felt more like it stemmed from thinking we had a son together and had been together since college. Karen kept insisting it wasn't too late to fix things, but I struggled to believe her. I had no patience left. Trust was utterly annihilated, and her words felt hollow. Even if I forgave her, I could never forget she slept with my brother. I've always believed in forgiving mistakes because we're all flawed, but this was beyond any acceptable limit. I left her crying on the doorstep and checked into a hotel. The next day, I went straight to my parents and revealed everything. The affair, David, the years of deception. The shock on their faces was undeniable. True to her nature, my mother initially tried to defend David, insisting her boy could never do such a thing to his own brother. Determined to expose the truth, I asked my parents to remain silent and let me call David in front of them. I needed to catch him off guard. When David answered, I confronted him about the affair. At first, he vehemently denied it, refusing any responsibility. But when I told him Karen had admitted to everything, he snapped. He started blaming her, calling her characterless. He actually claimed it wasn't his fault if women were attracted to him, that he was the better-looking brother. I told him firmly I would expose him to everyone. When David mocked me, saying no one would believe me because he was the golden child, I scoffed at his arrogance and thanked him for confirming the truth, knowing our parents had heard every word. David went quiet, then spluttered, desperately trying to explain himself, to salvage his image. My mother, still reeling from shock, demanded an explanation from David. He stuttered through a feeble attempt to justify his actions, blaming everyone else but himself, trying to shift the blame onto Karen. I could see my mother, once the fierce protector of her favored son, now felt a mix of profound disappointment and searing anger. In that charged moment, I felt a strange sense of vindication. For years, I had endured David's torment. Now the truth was out, and the roles were reversed. It was David who stood exposed, his actions laid bare for everyone to see. As David's words faltered, my father, usually so reserved, couldn't contain his disappointment. He took the phone from me. "David," my father began, his voice heavy with a betrayal I'd never heard before. "What you've done isn't just a betrayal of your brother, but a betrayal of this family. You slept with your brother's wife and continued the affair even after they were married. Your actions have severe consequences and have irreversibly shattered the trust we had in you. I raised both of you to value family, loyalty, and decency. What you've shown today defies everything I've tried to teach you." He paused, letting the crushing weight of his words sink in. "Your disregard for your brother's feelings and the lack of respect for his marriage are unacceptable. You've not only hurt him, but also torn apart the bonds that hold our family together. Your mother and I are partly to blame for what you've become, but we will no longer tolerate this behavior. From today, you're cut off from the college funds I set up for you. You'll have to figure out how to pay your university fees on your own. I will also stop funding your lifestyle. Do you think it makes you more of a man to sleep with married women? Let's see how you manage without my money." Throughout this, I maintained a composed demeanor. Initially, I'd wanted to scream at David, but watching my dad deliver that punishment was the ultimate vindication. I had exposed his true nature, and it was clear he had drastically underestimated the consequences. My mother, despite David's persistent protests, still tried to justify him, but my father swiftly ended the call, shutting down David's desperate attempts to explain away his actions. Afterward, Mom approached me and hugged me. It had been a long time since we shared such a moment, but in that embrace, there was an unspoken understanding and support. Amidst the family turmoil, she apologized for not believing me all this time. My 14-year-old self could never have imagined this moment, being vindicated and embraced by my mother. Following this, my dad helped me find a good lawyer to divorce Karen. She and her lawyer tried to fight dirty, asking for alimony since I earned more than her, but her affair played heavily in my favor. We also conducted a paternity test, and it was confirmed. David was indeed the father of the child. The news was incredibly painful, even worse than discovering Karen's infidelity. I was furious that the son I had loved and raised wasn't mine. However, I decided to stay strong. Karen begged me to continue visiting my son, arguing he shouldn't be punished, but I couldn't bear to see him. He reminded me too much of David, and I hated it. After my divorce was finalized, a profound sense of freedom washed over me as I moved into my own bachelor pad. It felt surreal to live alone since I had married so young and never really had the chance to experience true independence. However, my naturally independent nature allowed me to quickly adapt to my new lifestyle, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Then 2 weeks ago, my dad called. He told me he was considering changing his will because he didn't want to leave anything to David. My dad is incredibly stubborn, and once he decided to cut David out of his life, he stuck to it. David tried reaching out to our parents, even showed up at their doorstep begging for forgiveness, but they refused to let him in. Even my mother, who usually gave in to David's tantrums, seemed done with him, though it must have been hardest for her. David never texted me to apologize for what he had done, showing he didn't regret his actions. He was just upset about being cut off from our parents. Dad told me he planned to leave everything to me, ensuring David wouldn't contest it later. He would leave David only $1. My eyes widened in shock. My dad had worked hard his entire life. His assets, retirement fund, and life insurance totaled nearly $2 million. The only condition in his will was that if my dad passed away before my mom, she would continue living in their house, even though ownership would transfer to me. I didn't mind this. I wanted to care for my mom in her final days. Somehow, David found out about this. Unable to reach our parents, he called me yesterday trying to make amends. He explained how he was struggling with college and that after Karen discovered the paternity of the child, she had been pestering him for child support. He said he had no money, was looking for part-time jobs but couldn't find anything. He begged me to talk to our family to start fresh, since he really needed my help. I actually laughed in his face. I told him I was done with him. I reminded him that he should have thought about the consequences before sleeping with my wife and getting her pregnant. David argued that I was being unfair and that Karen was also to blame, to which I agreed. I reminded him that I had divorced her, making her his responsibility now. He shouldn't be calling me to complain about her or the child, since these were the consequences of his own actions. David started to raise his voice, but I interrupted, reminding him that he was no longer the favored child in the family, but the black sheep who had slept with his own brother's wife. At that moment, David began to cry, telling me how everyone, including our grandparents and relatives, had turned against him. While this was true, it was no longer my concern. I told him we were done, and that he should never call me again since I no longer considered him my brother. Since then, I've replayed that conversation in my mind. Despite my hatred for him, I had never heard him cry like that, not since we were kids. I won't lie, it did hurt me a bit to hear him so helpless. Update 1*. Many of you asked why I'm no longer in contact with my son, Henry. Some even called me cruel. I need to explain. I am not comfortable raising another man's child. This isn't a stepson situation. I was led to believe Henry was my son, only to later discover he is actually my brother David's son. Naturally, this revelation hurt deeply, and I cried over it for days. The main reason I don't want any contact with Henry is that I no longer want Karen in my life. If I remain connected to her child, she will find a way to re-enter my life, and I desperately need my space. You may think I'm cruel or selfish, but I can't see him ever again, at least not for a very long time. Update 2*. Most of you correctly guessed that it was my mother who informed David about my dad changing his will, leading David to call me as a last resort. I confronted her in front of my dad, and she broke down, saying I had punished David enough and that he had learned his lesson. My dad firmly told my mother that if she believed what David did was forgivable, then he could no longer stay married to her, because he could never forgive such a betrayal. This threat silenced my mother. My dad made it clear that if she ever talked with David again, and we found out, she could pack her bags and leave. As I mentioned, my dad is very stubborn. Hopefully, my mother will learn from her mistakes. Update 3*. Reddit. It's been 5 months since my last update. My relationship with my parents has improved significantly. My dad and I go golfing every weekend, and he treats me more like a buddy than a son, which I cherish. Although my mother misses David, she has stayed away from him. The last I heard about David was from my cousin, who said David had been asking everyone for money and eventually had to drop out of college because he couldn't afford the fees. He and Karen are living together, and he has a part-time job as a mechanic. Apparently, they are raising Henry together, which is a good thing, I guess. I never discussed David with my parents, and they don't bring him up either. For everyone asking, I am doing quite well. I was promoted at my job 2 months ago, so my salary has significantly improved. I haven't been dating anyone, as I feel I still need time and space to heal. I've been going to therapy, so we'll see how that works out. This whole journey, from childhood torment to this unbelievable twist of fate, has reshaped me entirely. It's proof that sometimes the universe has a brutal, yet strangely satisfying, way of balancing the scales. So, I have to ask you, given everything that happened, what would you have done in my position, especially with David's final desperate call? Let me know in the comments below. I really want to hear what you think.